Session 9 of the Unfinished Revolution Colloquium. And every time I have to say, this is not my unfinished revolution, this is society's unfinished revolution. And so the session's name is Bootstrapping in Your Organization and Community. So during the course of the previous 8 sessions, we've gone through the cycle of the different parts of the conceptual framework several times and talked about bootstrapping. So I'm going to dip into it a little bit more and then come up for air. And we have some very interesting speakers today, if I'm not. So anyway, let's get going. The idea for the terminology of the bootstrapping emerged for me way back. So I thought it'd be interesting to go back and to sort of show you the frame in which that introduced. So there was a report just 11 years after I started out on this great jaunt. I'd had some support from an Air Force Office of Scientific Research to actually do a study for building a conceptual framework. If I'd known at the time what the word paradigm meant, that hadn't been published yet, really, I probably would have said paradigms, but anyway. And that's a thick report that part of it was published a year and a half later in a book, as a chapter in a book. But a few years ago, this was put on the web. And so it was done in Germany, which is the first link, and there's some errors in there of translation. And then I think pretty much that was copied over to Stanford's history site, and that doesn't have any diagrams, so I used the German one still. And I really need to acknowledge the young graduate student who went and found that and managed to did a very nice job of converting. So we're going to get some views of that. So I say thank you, Dr. Friedewald. It was nice of him to do that and communicate with us and say it was accessible. So here's a part of that report. And the thing I'm trying to do is sort of develop the concept of the bootstrapping as it emerged in there, just to try to get it clearer. So I said, if I start a research activity, and I just labeled it A1, and I said I would be depending upon the existing discipline, information from existing disciplines out there in the world, and that would provide me the solid lines of information about psychology and what else has been going on in the world, but also the outside world would have provided me with tools and techniques which I could use to do the research, computer programming and the like, etc., like that. So both of those things were important. The background knowledge I was going to digest and use to do what I did, but also the things that would essentially augment me, something like that. So I had the dotted line for that. So then we started expanding in this report, expanding on that picture of saying, when I got going, I would have that product, and the product of our research would be, how do you augment yourself with computers? So look, we'd feed that output back, which was knowledge, etc., but it would come back in as capabilities and technologies that I could use to increase our laboratory's efficiency. So that was the very first thing that I call bootstrapping, just really directly feedback, that if your output is something that can improve your capability, boy, you plow it back and it's really good. So the thinking about that then matured during the writing of this contract till there was a whole framework, and I'm starting at the bottom of it because I couldn't get it all on the screen. So here's the D1 and the A2 that we were talking about here. So A2 now, we'll sort of unfold all this as it goes, just to show you something about an infrastructure in which the bootstrapping had quite a few levels of activity in it. So anyway, the total program that's the title was put in the report. Suggested relationship among the major activities involved in achieving a stated objective, which is essentially of significantly boosting human power in the A3 and U1 boxes, see. So, well, that's very noble. So it starts out, as I said, that the first box, D1 down there, is other disciplines relevant to basic augmentation research, psychology, linguistics, AI, computer science, automated instruction, etc. So then that feeds in directly with a dotted line and into the dotted line and a solid line, both into the actual basic research that we were going to establish. See, then this This was the basic augmentation research, empirically and total system oriented, to boost the capabilities on up the line of that, including itself. So actually, you know, by the sort of the late 60s, we were actually doing that and living with it, seemed like that. Then the next one was the special application research, specifically for given real-world problem-solving tasks. Among the first of these are A4 up here and U1 up here above. But so we explicitly oriented that for programming support, for our design, for then by 1974 for field support. We had people out there selling the services. So we were actually moving up the line in here of actually saying you have to put it to work in real environments in order to learn that. But you notice that by now you're starting to see more dotted lines, and that's where the intriguing part comes. So then this problem here we never really got going. We were always hoping, I was anyway, that you could get an activity going that can isolate critical problems and educate awareness among those who can initiate solutions. So this is why I was just so really tickled to have Jerry Glenn come and tell us, and Peter Yim tell us about the United Nations University Millennium Project to study what are the major big challenges to society. So I said, good, that's the kind of thing that we'd really like to do. And then the next one is, say, over here you like to get product development going so you can actually deliver those systems toward wider utilization. And we actually ended up in the commercial world actually doing that. But the thing is that by the time we got in the commercial world, the research that was supporting the bottom part got lost, and so all of that sort of vanished, and we were just floating up here on the top. But they learned a lot still out in the commercial world. And then up here we says, okay, finally, if you get this thing all working, you'd be able to attack the real problems of our society, and that was a big goal. Well, I still, that's what's in my mind. We talk about improvement infrastructure, etc., and augmenting large scope parts of society. So that's still there, and the nice feedback about dotted lines turning into solid lines and solid lines turning into dotted lines, etc., the feedback are all parts of how the thing can sort of bootstrap. So sometime I'm really looking forward to having a chance to have some people that I can dialogue with, call them fellows if you wish, or graduate students or something, that over the months we can start digging into a lot of these things and bore down, that it's more than I can hold and keep track in my head. So anyway, this bootstrapping idea is a strategic matter. It's for how to get the most improvement in your organizational capability per unit of expenditure in dollars and people efforts like that. So it's just looking at the scale of things as we did early on, we said it's just a huge scale problems out there and a huge scale challenge to try to build something that's going to affect, on a scale like that, affect our ability to cope with it. So anyway, so in that feedback pictures I talked about, there are many loops, and so that loop back gains in the organizational capability is part of the strategic thing to think about, and we haven't had a chance to dig down into that very much during this time, but it's a big factor in all the different little ways strategically you can make choices that do that kind of feedback to help bootstrap. So anyway, so the best bootstrapping is with loops which improve the improvement infrastructure. So we've been through that before. And that's why serious pursuit of the boosted collective IQ would be such a dynamite investment. See, for any large organization or significant social institution, for any country or for the world, that just seems to just fall into a huge amount of very quality, positive feedback to give you the boosting and bootstrapping in there. So anyway, then I ran across things called grand challenges, and people would variously list them out there in the world. And as far as I'm concerned, the 15 that Jerry Glenn's group has isolated as a good set of grand challenges. So he says, okay, they're sitting there for the world to take on. So he says, okay, how about noting that this augmenting our collective capability to deal with complex urgent problems could be classed as a grand challenge. See, that enhance our ability to pursue any or all the other grand challenge candidates. So in a sense, I kept saying that should be the grandest challenge of all. So it takes a little more than to write that down or say it around the world a few times, but it really is. So when is the world going to take after it explicitly? Which is different from saying, oh, we're working on e-commerce, we're working on knowledge management, etc. in our environments. It's sort of explicitly, how would you go about strategically to just say mankind, you're going to, it's like the invention of writing back there a long time ago. It's a new sort of way in which you can externalize your concepts and deal with them. So why not get going? And I saved Ted Nelson here for the last, because he's going to end up telling you, all right, it's all wrong, let's get going. So anyway, more appealing to say that challenge one of boosting society's collective I2, and by using that gain in turn to do number two, boost society's improvement infrastructure, and you says, oh boy, you get a second benefit out of that, the grand challenge of improvement infrastructure beating. But then you say, well, wait, that if you can boost two and you apply that to one, you've now got better ability to go do your boosted collective IQ because your improvement infrastructure is better. Well, if you do that better, then that can feed back into the improvement infrastructure that you can improve things better, which includes improving the collective IQ. So this just dynamics like that are there to go after, and so that's been the plan. That says, how could you beat that multiply compounding value proposition? So anyway, that's sitting there as a value proposition, but how do you turn that into a value proposition that you can talk inside of the bigger organizations that really have to be involved in this before it's really going to work? So I found some interesting slides that we used in classes in 91 and 92 in seminars, and boy, they just said it so well still, so I'm going to pour some of them at you now. So he says, okay, it's going to be likely that many organizations will not adapt quickly enough or appropriately enough to survive the complex and rapid environmental changes that we're just headed for. So these rapid environmental changes will be a continuing phenomena for many decades. The surviving organizations will likely have established especially energetic and intelligent internal processes to plan and manage their evolution. So what it says is needed, a pragmatic global continuing strategy for investing in evolutionary improvement. So that's the kind of bootstrap strategy purpose. Continuing evolutionary improvement. So we come around to that what we have to do is find an effective evolutionary environment and get it established. And look at the kind of things that impede that and see if you can readjust our social structures, etc., so that we can actually get going on that kind of bootstrapping. And here's a curve I put in some years ago. It says, if you got some brand new capability enhancing augmentation system, whatever it is, you bring it in and it's going to cost you for time. Probably drop your capability and your productivity, etc., and then slowly work its way up till it sort of does its thing. And during all that time you're spending money and getting it installed and build up, get it going, so it's fairly expensive. So you said, so what you have to do is trade off that expense for the gain in capability. But here's what really has been happening all the time in the computer world. Curve A, GUI and everything else, so it's easy to learn and you get up there quickly. And we kept saying, hey, look, there's things like that. You really ought to find out what kind of capability gains are possible and then judge whether or not the expense of transforming to that, get that, is worth the gain. But some a priori thing that was fixed by people's paradigm of how we're going to work, and particularly by the term of automating your office work, would just sort of nail it there. So this is the kind of thing, and both Ted and I think have been just for years fuming and flapping our hands and saying, look, there really are different things that can be tried. They aren't the kind of ways you're used to reading and working and talking and interacting with people, but those all built up around the means we had for communicating and externalizing our symbols at the time. So we take that as the natural human way, just because that's how we adapted to the technologies and the means at the time. Wow, we're freed from that now, so we can back up and really learn some different things. So That's just a very important thing. So over and over again, when in the world you're trying to tell somebody, look, here's something important you could be doing, then if they don't sort of see that there really is potential like that, they shrug their shoulders and wonder why you're flapping your hands and waving. It says, you know, we're already doing it, the market's taking care of it, da-da-da. So anyway, very, very critically important that somehow we start being able to demonstrate the kind of new capabilities that are there in an environment that's significant to people. So anyway, so now this is a term, then they were already talking groupware. The web wasn't out there yet, etc., but we were swinging our hands. So anyway, the user organization community must become more proactive, and this is something I've said before. But unless the user organizations really start trying to figure out where they can go and actively assessing it and making plans for boosting that, then they're going to say, ho hum, we're already buying the best from, you know whom or something, and you say, well, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot more you can do. And they said, well, what do you mean the marketplace is what takes care of that, isn't it? And you said, well, the marketplace won't know how to take care of it if the users, the consumers, which are end user organizations, aren't really proactively looking out ahead to say where can they go and where do they want to go. And they're not going to be doing that unless they invest in looking out ahead, etc. So this is the kind of problem. If they stay not investing in extending their sight and the understanding, then they're going to be walking along like this. So someday some of them are going to start looking out there and making plans that will be different, and then the short-sighted ones are going to sort of suffer for it. So anyway, all we have to do is get some long-term ones started. So there are, I think what I'll do is here, I've got quite a train of things like this I'd like to deliver to you, but we can stop in between and sort of introduce some of our speakers and have them give us some discussions about their particular points of view. And so one point of view that's really interesting is measures and how you get quality out there in people and how you get them to sort of move along with tools that have standards in them, etc. So I'm going to introduce Alan Brown and set him up. Okay, Alan, this is you. So he's president and CEO of Open Group, and you'll tell him who that is, right?
Certainly.
So 20 minutes is fine. 25.
Good afternoon. Well, let me just tell you, the Open Group is a non-profit consortia, and it brings large suppliers of IT products and services face-to-face with a large number of the major user organisations. And if we want to talk about grand challenges, the grand challenge is enabling the suppliers to deliver products to their users that interoperate. And interoperability is really the grand challenge in IT. I thought I'd start out by saying what it's not. And in IT, we hadn't quite got as far as the railroad industry, I think it's fair to say. You know, in the railroad industry, what they discovered long ago was that if all the tracks are the same gauge and all the couplings work the same way, you get an awful lot further. Now, in IT, it's kind of difficult to do that. What happens in the railroads is that if you wanted to go from A to B and B to C, you know, once upon a time, if the tracks didn't join up, people had to get off of the train, get onto another train and move along. Well, that still happens a heck of a lot of time now. You might be comforted to know that the Department of the Defence, when they were looking at ways in which they could have end-to-end service for delivering information to the warfighter in the US, that they found that somewhere between issuing the command and the instruction arriving at the point of delivery, if you will, there was someone in the middle transcribing data from one machine to another. Okay? It's not quite there. Now, the reason is that customers don't buy the platforms. They don't buy the underlying stuff so much. They buy a solution to a problem. And the solution drives the decision of the application drives the decision of the platform, and so forth. And the suppliers would all want to be your number one solutions provider. So they would like very much to differentiate their products, and not only on quality, speed and service, but also on features that give you better service, but at the same time give you an issue of lack of interoperability. So as I say with the train example, if you wanted to get from A to B, if that was problem B, and you've got to get from B to C, which is problem C, you would think that you could just add them together and you could do the whole journey. And so you would think that solution A is solution B plus C. But in the IT world, unfortunately, in order to get from there to there, obviously it doesn't work. And so you have people called systems integrators that actually make quite a good living at fixing the problem. So what you have with integrating competing solutions in IT is a lot of work to make it work. Now, for a large organization, if you think of a user organization like a bank or a retailer or an aircraft manufacturer, there are certain barriers that this causes them. The time barrier for any organization, time to market of new products and services is a big issue. They all want to provide, all user organizations, their IT departments all want to provide better products and services and tools to their end users, either to make them more productive or to make them more competitive. And time is a big issue. There's time in installation, there's time in training, and when you're dealing with multiple different operating systems, interoperability with the human is an issue that you have to address as well. Obviously, integration, if you've got to make two things work together that weren't designed to work together, you have an implementation problem. And guess what? If you've got two different technologies that need to be supported, you need two different skills in the workforce to support them for the rest of their natural life. And risk in terms of operational risk, what I mean by that is if you're trying to run a business and things don't work together, but you've got to implement them and make them work, when you make things join together, you've got some custom-built parts in the middle, and there is a risk that you may not be able to provide service as you would want to. And obviously, although many of the products individually have got superb security services, when you have to join them together, what you find in the joins is that this is the gap where people can get in. What I wanted to do with this matrix was to just look at some of the economics behind interoperability and where it comes from. Now, I would suggest to you that anything on the right-hand side of this matrix is not a particularly highly profitable area to play in for any of the suppliers. They particularly don't want to do a lot of innovation if there's low interoperability. There's not an awful lot of issue in being in the fragmented box, because although initially there may be profits out of products that don't interoperate, sooner or later you get found out. So, for example, there are even standards around today where products all allegedly conform to the standard, and yet they don't interoperate. And there's a big issue on market take-up then. Where we've got things that have been around for a while, in the generic sense, we have high interoperability, everyone can use it, it's easy, it's put in, but the innovation is low, it's relatively stable, and it can move on. Not an awful lot of profit in generic or commodity type products. Now also, if you get into a monopoly situation, there's reasonably good profit because you own that space, but the innovation is low. But where you get a lot of activity and a lot of competitors all fighting out, and that there are huge opportunities for profit, is when the innovation is high and the interoperability is high. The railroad business discovered that by having interoperability, the market expanded, and therefore they could all make more money. The telecom sectors have discovered much of this. So by having greater interoperability, everyone can make more money, and the market grows. Right? But it's where the market is being constrained, either through low interoperability or through the monopoly cases, that you hold things back. So we're very much looking for enabling dramatic and dynamic market growth through the combination of high innovation and high interoperability. That, of course, is a very big challenge. Now, how do we get the communication between the customers and the suppliers? The customers know the problem they're trying to fix, so they know that in their organisation there is an integration issue. And the suppliers know that if they're going to change their products, rather than their competitors changing their products, someone's got to pay for it. Now, what happens out there is that most of the big customers, whether it's the banks or the Defence Department, most of the big customers can get any of the suppliers to come to them anytime they want. In fact, some of them have a problem keeping them away. But when you have a one-on-one discussion between a customer and a supplier, the focus is very much on the product's benefits and features of a specific product. It's not on how it interoperates with their competitors' products. So the focus in one-on-one discussion is very much on improving a product within its own boundaries. In order to have discussion on interoperability, you have to have a many-to-many relationship. You need many suppliers whom the customers are talking to at the same time, so that the focus is not on individual products, but on the joins, on the integration, on the interoperability. And you need many customers, because if there's not, then perhaps there's no market. So you have to have both. Now, if you've got through all of that, and you've got a large number of customers and a large number of suppliers to come together and agree on a standard, you can specify the product, and the suppliers will, some of them will say, we're okay, we've got a market position here, we can move on. Others will swallow hard and spend some money and get there. But the point of getting a standard where everyone agrees on a specification isn't necessarily the end of the line. First of all, you can agree on a standard, but there may not be any products that arrive, at least for a long time. I think if you look back at some of the drivers of the World Wide Web, some of the underlying standards were around for an awful long time before products came out that started driving the market forward. Now, sometimes we will get to an issue of the standard there, and then we might wait for the market to decide. Well, there's two issues with that. One is the market can't decide if there's nothing to buy. And the other is that the market isn't always that smart. I think if the market was smart, we might have Betamax, not VHS. Or we might have Apple rather than something else. So that's one issue. The next one is if we spend a long time getting to the standard, perhaps the market's moved on anyway and there's other alternatives. So the one concern that suppliers legitimately have is that if they've gone to all the time, trouble and expense of finding ways to interoperate with their competitors, does anyone care when they've got there? In some areas we find that everyone can claim to conform to the standard, and many of them sincerely believe that they do. Unfortunately, they can claim to conform to the standard but still not interoperate. Now the reason for that is just like legislation. No law maker can write something that is sufficiently clear that everyone can get it straight off without some case study, without it being tested in the courts. It's similarly difficult for everyone to go away and implement a standard or a specification in exactly the same way and know that it's going to interoperate when they come out and meet their competitors. So how do you know it conforms? Well, as a buyer, there are a number of ways you can do it. You can either trust the guy that says, my products conform, you can trust me, I'm a salesman. Or you can ask for proof of tests, or you can ask for a guarantee. And what we prefer is that it is tested to give the suppliers an indicator that products conform, but that they guarantee that they will interoperate. That's a challenge. And supposing you've got that far, how do you tell that they do interoperate until you've got a problem? And so how do they get fixed? Oh, and the last one, there are lots of standards out there. And maybe the standards don't interoperate. All right, let's have a look at some of the process though. What we try and do is to reflect the customer need with the supplier desire. So all the customer need is very simply, they need products from their suppliers that interoperate. All the suppliers therefore need to do is to agree. And that's not too straightforward. We have the sense of a requirement coming from the customers to the suppliers. And in normal product development, that wouldn't be a direct one-to-one relationship. You would go through some product management activities. The suppliers will work diligently on getting a specification delivered. And once they've got a specification, they will start looking for how we assure that these products will conform. So there's some testing. But the testing only serves to give the suppliers an indicator that their products conform, so that they have the confidence to step up to a mark that says, we guarantee that our products conform, and we will stand by that guarantee. We'll fix it if there's a problem. And finally, we're concerned with procurement to make sure that if we've gone all the way through that loop, people are actually going to buy the products at the end of the day. This is how consortia come together in that learning process, if you will, to try and get to this. Very often suppliers create and promote consortia. Very few consortia, like the Open Group, have customer members. So the consortia go out to advise, inform, instruct the customers. At the end of the day, obviously, we can see that there's a loop between the suppliers who supply the products and the customers that buy them. But there's got to be a process in the middle. Now, whether it's us as a consortia or whether it's one of our partner consortia, what happens is that there's an outsourcing of the management and the certification process to an organisation such as ourselves, who would also deal with bringing together the customer requirements and build the test software so that at the end of the day you can certify that the products conform and provide the guarantee that the customers are looking for. Finally, let me just leave you with these thoughts. The payoff for interoperability for the customers are overcoming the barriers that I talked about earlier. There's the time, the cost, and the risk. What the suppliers get out of it is greater market growth and to be able to position themselves for that market growth by being involved at every stage of the development process. But rather than differentiating gratuitously, they're differentiating in ways that can benefit the customer by providing better quality, faster service, better price, or features and benefits above the basic level that we've agreed on the standard. Thanks.
Well, you want to sit down with a mic, then we'll what I'd hope to do then as we get a little dialogue here is at least two people here and Jeff, etc., are involved in things like this, and then what's the connection between the process he's been describing, and if they really get any kind of really open way in which the knowledge containers that are going to show and carry our knowledge in really new ways, they have to be open, interoperable. And I just had a dramatic experience when I was part of McDonnell Douglas. Is the engineers pointed out to me how many suppliers were involved in very close interaction with the actual, say, 2,000 people in McDonnell Douglas who designed and manufactured the thing. And there was 6,000 companies involved. And they said a big air transport would be 13 or more thousand. And those all have to interchange, critical kinds of knowledge and design specs and actual product and testing materials, etc. And the kind of ways in which all the hypermedia in the future are going to be able to connect with all that and help the dialogue go on are just dramatic. So that just convinced me there needs to be something like that. So anyway, is there anything from our seated panel here who want to query and talk to Alan? Oh,
it seems to me that there are a number of different approaches in trying to improve various parts of organizational IQs, and Alan has touched upon one. And in terms of his consortium model, he's looking at the suppliers on the one hand and the customers on the other hand. In our case, as the software productivity model, our funders or our suppliers, if you will, are also the customers. So we really have that closed loop, if you will, in terms of the improvement process. And so the other part that strikes me is that if you want to relate it to the models that have been discussed in this group, my understanding is that Alan touched upon a group of suppliers who typically fall into the space of tool suppliers or infrastructure suppliers. In order to improve the organizational IQ, we need other parts, other aspects to be improved, such as processes and frameworks and so forth. And there are various organizations that are trying to wrestle with these various aspects, and at some point they need to be coming together.
Kurt?
I spent a large part of my career in consumer electronics, and you mentioned the example of Betamax. I would say the industry really learned from that. And generally now they do form standards because they want that big market. And I would suggest MPEG-2, MPEG-4, there are a lot of examples of that where the industry got together and established a world standard. They want a world standard now. And I would just suggest that the forces of the web and the kind of markets that are available worldwide are going to force people more into this mode than the other.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's inevitable that people will move into that mode. Where we are on the software side, certainly on the platform side, it's taking longer to get there because there are a lot of people looking to try and establish a differentiated position constantly.
An example you might mention would be so-called multimedia. Hi. An example is so-called multimedia, where we have Macromedia Director, we have Flash, we have PowerPoint, we have QuickTime, and we have the World Wide Web, whatever that is at a given week. And the interoperability level is very slight and probably will remain so. Things can be exported, things can be transformed, like you create Little Women, the video game, but it is no longer very much like what you started with. So I think that while in mission-critical applications and areas where there is a, shall we say, well-defined thing something's supposed to do, such as a rocket reaching the moon, it's possible to agree on standards. I think the prospect may be much bleaker in the media area.
Unbelievable. Well, I just got a message on my computer saying there's some kind of a blip and I should reboot. And
well, while you're doing that, let me just give you an example that the Department of Defense brought to our conference in January, which is that they're trying to implement object technology. And there is an existing standard for object technology, but nothing conforms with it. And if they don't...
Would you tell us what that standard is?
No. Well, the standard is the Corba 2.1 standard.
It's one of many standards.
Which is one of many. And we're trying to work with the standards body that is responsible for that to try and help the industry get to a point where orbs from different manufacturers will interoperate and enable the DoD to do what it is they want to do. Now, the issue for them is that if we can't get to interoperability, then they are likely to have one of two choices. One is buy nothing and go someplace else, and the other is to single source. And for any large organization, single sourcing, buying all your pencils from one place is a big deal. But buying mission critical application infrastructure is a very significant step. And the same is true of security and certificates of security. Same problem, lack of interoperability. And what do? Do we go someplace else and try and figure out a different way of doing it? Do we single source? Or do we work with the suppliers to understand how they can, how everyone in the market can benefit, and that we can get interoperable products delivered, and everyone can go off, the market can grow, and more innovation will follow?
The League of Nations was an endeavor to settle international issues peacefully, and trying to settle standards peacefully may run into the same historical eventuality.
so what do we glean from that?
Are you ready to continue?
Well, the only thing I would say about that is I've personally experienced a number of standards activity in the area of media that have been successful. So I have examples where, in fact, it is possible to do this, and to do it at a very high level of achievement and come up with an excellent standard. So I think there are models out there, like the PEG-2 group and others, that you can build on when the market is big enough and when the players in the market have decided, after hurting themselves badly enough a number of times going after large markets, that it's a better route.
And as with MPEG, sometimes the player's decisions may hurt them, as in MP3.
See, I should apologize to everybody. I invited Ted.
You knew what you were getting into.
But I've known him for many years, and we've agreed that we'll stay friends anyway. Jeff, did you have anything to comment on?
I could go on for hours.
Scott?
I have a colleague who did a contract for a military or general in one of the armed services. We told him, go find out why this year's version of this does not work with last year's. And he started doing an audit through the system. That the programmers seem to be doing a good job, the designers are doing a good job, until someone high up in the organization took him aside and said, look, if we made it compatible with last year's, we wouldn't be selling as many this year. And so some of the answers have nothing to do with even single sourcing. There's manipulation going on to preserve their market.
So I think we'll get on with that, but there's several things about the standards, and one of them is, and I really feel that unless the end user organizations get more proactive, they're going to be tugged around. And then the other one is that when we get into this whole area of sort of collective IQ and things like that, where you're exchanging knowledge, and the vocabulary and the dialogue that goes on between you really gets to be essentially like, hey, was the control of the evolution of our vocabulary and our dictionaries under the control of somebody who got a patent on the word, pick a word, and you couldn't use it unless you got the okay with that. And you just say, look, when we're getting into that domain, the drift of what's happened in the world into actually language and thinking, etc., and communicating, it's just hard to believe that society, if it gets smarter, will put up with that. There has to be some new way. And what did I do? All right.
Quick thought. Seems to me we're, with the rate of change increasing now, we need to stop looking at objects and specific insights and start creating a language of flows of processes where insight is a constant flow of discovery.
Right. So that's part of the evolution that I really see has to be done. And you have to evolve the environment so that the way in which we think can work with our heads can evolve effectively. So anyway, I know this could open up a whole bunch. So we'll open up something else by introducing Kurt Carlson, who is the president and CEO of Stanford Research Institute. And he's going to speak. And shoot him dead.
Thank you, Doug. I want to talk a little bit about the value proposition and how I think about Doug's ideas and how we apply some of them at SRI. I'm going to make some very simple concepts, and I hope it doesn't offend anyone. I want to do it to make a contrast so that when I contrast some of those things with Doug's thoughts, we'll be able to see the difference. So I hope you'll bear with me on this. Let's see, wrong way. So Einstein once was asked, what is the most powerful force in the universe? And he said, compound interest. He may or may not have said that, but compound interest is still an amazing thing. And this is the central theme and concept behind my talk today. Now here's a simple caricature of what it means to build a product. Someone has a tool and they build a product. So that's good. And historically people have worried about quality at the same time. But this was pretty much kind of the mindset. Get the product out and you're done. Now what Doug is talking about is a knowledge accumulation model. Basically you have a product, and in some sense it becomes a tool, tool one, which helps you build another product, product two. And that product can be used as a tool to help you make the third product and keep this process going. Now you'll recognize that as basically being an equation that says the next thing that I produce is equal to what I have now times some fraction, 1 plus k, and if k is bigger than 1, it basically derives a differential equation for an exponential. So the goal of all this is to, in fact, create exponential performance improvements. And some well-known exponentials. Moore's law is a classic version of this, where the power of computers doubles every 18 months. Metcalfe's law is a different kind of law, but it's also an exponential. It says basically that the value of a network goes up as the square of the number of connections. That was not true before we had the internet. Back when we had radio and television, basically it was a linear model. Every time you added another consumer, that particular value proposition went up by 1. In this case, when you add another consumer, it goes up by n squared. So it's fundamentally different from what we had. It's not the radio, it's not television, it's something different. And these are powerful forces, as Einstein suggested, that we pay attention to. Now, these ideas have been around for a long time. So here's my simple caricature of what the job was a long time ago. You pick berries, raise kids, hunt, pick berries, raise kids, hunt, pick berries, raise kids. That's a different kind of recursive process, but pretty fundamental. But nevertheless, even though people were doing that, they were basically still on this exponential improvement curve, even though, as I say up there, we were on the Taylor series part of the curve that was linear. At least it seemed linear at the time. Now, so you can put Doug into this context. Basically, basically, an A-level task would be to grow or gather food. B is an axe, so you can do it better. And C, developing new materials and processes as a way to improve B so you can improve how you do A. The NIC was the campfire where everybody got together. That was the network improvement community. The dynamic knowledge repository in the Kodiak was old folks telling stories. By the way, it's hard to improve on that. The most compelling form of communication is in the form of a story. And I would say that just that one example shows you how far away we are scientifically from having the kind of capability that Doug dreams about. The MetaNEC was the annual powwow where all the different communities got together and shared stories about how they can improve the processes that they're using to improve how they do their business. And there are lots of examples. Language is one that evolved this way. But you go from the stone axe to the bronze axe to the iron axe, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a nice set of metaphors here. So what's different with Doug? These ideas are as old as mankind, so I tried to write down what I think is different about Doug in the way he views the world. And I've emphasized a few things here. Networked improvement community. Networked is the key word here. It's often said that point of view is worth 80 IQ points. The objective of a networked improvement community is to collect as many plus 80 IQ points as you can. That's collective intelligence. We're a lot smarter as a group, orders of magnitude than we are individually. It's recursive. That's the bootstrapping idea. It builds on itself. In fact, Doug is recursive, his model, in every way you can imagine. It really is a very thorough analysis of how many recursive ways you can build value to make an improvement community. It's comprehensive. There are many NICs. Product quality circles obviously have been around for a long time, but Doug says, well, that's not enough. Quality, of course, is important. It's fundamental. That's one of the really key things we ought to pay attention to, but it's not enough. It applies to every aspect of the job. Innovation, new product development, ethics, all kinds of issues that intercept what makes progress possible. It's inclusive. People often talk about computers and machines, but they forget to talk about people. And I'm going to argue shortly that the people part of this equation is extremely fundamental. You should change your battery.
Plug it in.
Oh, it's plugged in. Maybe it's not turned on.
Is this the plug?
No. The other way. There you go. there was a power strip, but it wasn't turned on. And I once was an honest electrical engineer.
Okay. How do I get this to work?
Two icons to the right.
This one right here. Right?
There's two more to the right.
Two more?
To your right.
Oh, it's this one, right. There you go. Great. Okay, let's see. I was at Inclusive, Machines and Humans. As I said, I'm about to argue that the human part of this is equally as important, particularly in the world that we're about to enter. Doug's approach is systematic. We just made a little joke about A tasks, B tasks which improve A, and C which improve B so you can improve A. But that kind of thinking is systematic, and every time you have a situation where you don't have a B and a C, it's a little red flag that ought to go up and say, maybe I've got an opportunity to do a better job. It's intelligent and persistent. Again, I made a little joke about old folks telling stories, but it shows to you the value of that.
I took it personally.
Doug's a great storyteller, and we're all here because of his ability to tell stories. So I'd actually say he's a perfect example of the point I'm trying to make here. And it has to scale. There are many meta-NICs. So a meta-NIC is one that is to improve the NICs, but there are many. It's not just one kind, and we can learn from everyone. So we all know about some exponential doubling times, computers, memory, fiber optics, the human genome, the web. There are lots of them these days. But eventually, they're going to impact things that really matter to us, like shelter, food, medicine, entertainment, education. Education basically hasn't been touched yet, as you all know. It's a really important problem. Entertainment, we're beginning to see that as soon as there's one so-called standard, we move on to another level of technology. It's gotten to be really interesting. Back in the 50s, a standard like radio or television would stick around for 50 years or more before another one would come up. It's not true anymore. Medicine is a profound one. We're being seen now as basically, big strings of software in treating us as information. And once we start treating ourselves as information, then we go on the equivalent of Moore's law in terms of how we're going to be treated and the way we're going to interact with our doctors. So I just say, so obviously this isn't going to last forever. So just to make this point one other way, 30 years ago, most stuff was on a 30 to a 50-year doubling time scale. And Moore's law was down at the bottom of the economy, and even though it was chunking along at 2 times every 18 months, frankly, it didn't affect very much. Well, that's different today. Moore's law now intercepts just about everything. That's basically the motivation behind the bubble that we're going through right now. And of course, Metcalfe's law came along in the form of the internet as another driver to push the activity that's going on. Well, those aren't going to stop, and they're going to now affect most of that other stuff too, as I just tried to argue. So most of the things that are important to us are going to be on some kind of exponential in the era that we're going into. So a question comes up, well, if you want to be on an exponential, what are the key ingredients that you must satisfy to be on it? So I think there are 4 things. And I believe if one of these is missing, it doesn't work. I'm going to argue there are lots of other things too, and Doug has always argued there are a whole family of things, but at least these 4. First, it has to be an important problem. It has to be something basically where there's no limit. You double the performance. It's like raising a kid. You teach them something, you want to double that, and double it, and double it, and double it. There's basically no limit to how much you can teach your child. Education, fiber optic communications, I put this one down right now because for every halving of the cost of fiber optics communication, the market potential goes up by 50%. You can't satisfy it. So the companies they're after that market are basically doing everything they can to grow as fast as they can. Ideas. In order for you to stay on an exponential, there need to be new ideas. You can't grow if there aren't new ideas. That means concepts, representations, new technologies, inventions, systems. Business innovations, ultimately business innovations have historically been more important than the technology. The technology opens the door, but it's the business innovation that really makes it work. And strategies, as Doug has already mentioned. Of course, you need resources, people and dollars. Today, dollars basically don't matter. You can raise lots of money. The only thing that's really important is do you have a really keen idea and do you have the people? And you need a recursive process. Build it and iterate. Build it and iterate. Build it and iterate. If you have these things, you can be on an exponential. So at SRI, just to give you an example, we take these ideas quite seriously. And we apply them to a couple of different kinds of activities. So we apply these when there's an important problem. If it's a trivial problem, we don't think about it. We just do it and get on to the next thing. But if there's a really important problem that society needs solved, we will go after that one. That requires a vision and a strategy to think about those. And I would say, when you think of Doug's classic work back in 1968, he had a very powerful vision that motivated Jeff and others to join him to make computers and humans more intelligent, to be able to create a more productive and worthwhile environment. Champions and teams. So I like passion. I like people who have passion. I believe people with passion change the world. Doug is a passionate champion of his ideas. You need ideas. You need lots of smart people in many disciplines because most of the problems that are interesting today are multidisciplinary. You need multiple representations. In mathematics, it's known that if you don't have at least 2 representations, you can't solve a hard problem. Fermat's last theorem was solved with something like 40 or 50 different transformations to be able to look at that problem in enough ways to solve it. That's a metaphor that's useful for all of us in our work today. And their business models, processes, and human considerations, which I'll come to in a minute, and the recursive process. So what this means is if you are putting together a proposal, you put it down quickly, you put it in front of people, you collect ideas, you create another version, you do it again, you do it again, you do it again. If you're doing a demonstration, it's not enough to talk about it. Talking about it doesn't do it. It doesn't capture the idea. You've got to build the demo, put it in front of people, collect their ideas, implement it again, collect more ideas, implement it again, and do that. And do that really fast, and do that with enthusiasm. And if you do that, you get on, there's no such thing as an exponential for this kind of activity, but there's something that looks an awful lot like it. And it's fun when you do this. Now, I want to get back to another thing that Doug emphasizes, which technology may be a driver for this, but the thing that makes it work is people. And it's perhaps the most important thing in the world today. The technology is going to come. It's the question of how do you treat and think about people. People make exponentials work or not work. If you have a company that has a doubling time of 2 every 6 months, and you have a personnel crisis in your company, you can be out of business. It's very nonlinear when these kinds of effects come together and you get involved in a business that's so dynamic that it's doubling every 6 months or 12 months. Anything, a financial crisis, a personnel crisis, it can basically crack the bubble and put you in jeopardy. So these funny words that are on this view graph are actually things that we take very seriously. The 3 commandments: respect, integrity, generosity of spirit. At SRI, we have at least 6 NICs that I can count that are up and running. And I went to the person who runs one of them the other day, and I said, when you put together a NIC, what's the most important thing? And I thought she might say, the application or something. She said, Kurt, it's respect and trust. I said, well, okay, that's true. I'm sure that's true. But what else comes to mind? She said, Kurt, it's respect and trust. I said, well, yeah, I understand that, but what else do you think about? Kurt, it's respect and trust. It's like, how many times do I have to tell him that if you want to have a network community and you don't have respect and trust, nothing can happen. nothing can happen. It's really fundamental. So these funny words, you know, Dilbert, stock and trade, cynicism, distrust, and misunderstanding. It's natural when you're changing an organization. Dilbert lives on that. And when you're on an exponential where you're doubling every 6 or 12 months, the amount of cynicism you can build up is enormous. So you have to name it. You have to address it. You have to deal with it. So without going through all these things, I really think that these things are important, more important than ever when you buy into this kind of a vision. And the reason I put staff as partners is I think that's the only way you can treat your staff in this kind of a world. They have to be your partners, or else you can't have that kind of relationship with them. And I think that's a really big transformation in the way we work. But by the way, it's a really nice work. There's nothing on this page that anyone would disagree with. They're all good values. They're all positive values. They're all values that help people grow and be bigger and better than they are.
There are intellectually.
Excuse me?
You haven't explained all the acronyms there.
Well, I actually wasn't going to. The DNA of change has to do with there has to be a demonstrated need to change. The N stands for a new vision, and the A is an action plan. If you don't have a need, a vision, and a plan, people don't change. But it's not enough. If you ask me if the company has a need, a vision, and a plan, and I don't fit into it, then I'm not going to buy into it. So this personal transformation bullet down on the left-hand side says Vision A to Vision Z. So I have to help you see how the skills that you have can be morphed into this new job, and that when you get there, not only are you going to be valued, you're going to be more valued and have more potential and more returns than you have today. That's my job as a manager. If I can't do that, you probably won't buy in. And so it goes.
FAIC and FUD.
Excuse me?
FAIC and FUD.
FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That comes up all the time. You have to address that. The motivation part, freedom to do your job, we have to respect people. A is achievement. If we're scientists, a lot of us are scientists in this room. The thing why we got into the business is for achievement. We want to make a difference. I stands for involvement. If you don't involve us in decisions that are important to us, that can affect our freedom to do our jobs or our ability to achieve, there'll be a crisis. It's predictable. There'll be a crisis. And C is community. We want to be part of a community. And I believe that companies that can address these four things are well on their way to keeping people. Jeff and I were just talking about this. Even if they're not getting the kinds of stock options they might be getting somewhere else. And I do know that if you don't satisfy these four things, no matter how much you pay people, they won't stick. They won't stay. They'll go somewhere else where they can get those done. So, you see I have a little passion on this topic too, right? Now, I went through this because I want to make a major point about Doug's work. If you think about, if you accept the idea that we're moving into an exponential world and the business models that we ought to have and the way we do business should be exponential, then you can look at other organizations and kind of quantitatively say, are they on that path? Or aren't they? Now, DoD research, corporate R&D, and incubators. I picked four things. Did this with Jeff and Doug the other night. DoD research. They actually go 6-1, 6-2, 6-3. They have a linear process for innovation. How can they be successful in this world? They're not, and they can't be. You can just look at it, the way they do business. They cannot be successful. Corporate R&D. Put a lot of really smart people in a building out in Montana someplace, and don't let them interact with the market and all the other people in the company, and you have to get permission from some vice president before you can go talk to somebody. How can this be useful? It can't. And it's basically going away in America right now. Incubators, that was another one we came up with. That one's a really curious idea. On the face of it, it's a really good idea. So let's take a couple smart people who want to form a company, we'll put them in a place, and we'll take care of their heating and give them janitorial services and those kinds of things. But there are no ideas in an incubator. It's kind of a sterile environment. It doesn't feel like an exponential environment. So you look at these and you say, what's missing? And it really becomes, if you think this way, it becomes really easy to look at them and say, what's missing and what should be added? So this diagram is an attempt to begin to think about some projects that would satisfy some of these requirements, and where you could go to people and make a challenge to them about why they ought to participate and ways that they might want to participate. So I mentioned DoD on the left-hand side. That's a great example because they're so fundamentally broken that that they have almost any improvement would make a big a change with how they do business. So what this says is go to DoD, and I'm going to do that, and basically say what they ought to do is form a NIC to pick some problem that's important to them and use it kind of as a benchmark for their thinking, just as I just suggested. Use it as a benchmark for how you're doing your R&D and the other parts of your business, and then borrow Jeff's idea from the last session, which is while you're at that, why don't you take 10% of your money that you want to spend on that and put it into a meta-NIC, the tools and teams box up there, and work on some really hard fundamental problems and begin to collect the experiences that you learn from that. So I put some possible things that need to be worked on. Collaborative environments basically don't work today. In spite of what people say, they don't work. There's no security. They're not interoperable. You can't have the kinds of collaborative tools you want. They just basically don't work. You can't do it. So that's a good thing to work on. And by the way, if it's out of the context of an application, it obviously doesn't make sense to do that. So DoD, here's something you can make a big impact on, but put it into the right environment. Databases, the Kodiak. I told the story of old folks telling stories. Well, that shows you how far away database technology is from the kind of goal that's required for this. That's a grand challenge problem. That's a good problem to work on. Human performance. I emphasize those human properties because they ought to be kept track of. And when that lady I mentioned, Judy, who said respect and trust, that should be understood. What does she mean by that? How do we capture that and begin to share that with people so that they won't have the same personnel crises the next time they form a NIC and want to basically do the same thing? And Doug mentioned World Health. I think that's another great application. I'm going to be giving a talk to the head of the National Cancer Institute, and I'm going to propose that they form one. Education. We already have a bunch of ones going in education. So if we could get them to be taxed according to Jeff's rule, maybe we could begin to put together a meta-NIC. And then maybe other groups would form other NICs, and they would have their meta-NIC, and then you could get people to share. And so then we'd begin to incrementally, recursively, if I could steal a word, move toward this vision that Doug has been laying out. So in conclusion, I think the goal of this ought to be exponential performance improvement. I think that's a grand challenge. I think it's inevitable, so I frankly don't think we have any choice. We have to move in that direction. It requires important problems, champions and teams, lots of ideas, recursive processes and more, lots more, but great human values and involvement based on respect and trust. I kind of like that. And I'd just like to acknowledge that I have collected any ideas that I picked up from a lot of really smart people. And I just mentioned some here. Bill Wilmot, who's a wonderful guy. He runs a collaboration institute. He and I actually have a draft of a book on exponential teams. Norm Winarski, a colleague from Sarnoff, other people, my wife, and of course, Doug. So thank you.
Let's have some dialogue. Don't let him get away easily.
I'd like to pick up on the DoD idea and just want to share with you right away. DoD came to us in the form of a DARPA initiative and essentially confirmed or said the same thing: the system's broken. DoD research is not getting to the warfighter, the old words. It takes 7 to 15 years to ever find the research into any kind of product that might be useful. And as a result, they started an initiative called Action. And we have been given part of that grant. And we have already started working on it, and we're planning a workshop on dealing with those issues. And what we're going to be dealing with is not the Kodiak or DKR part, because they're apparently tasked other people to do that. But we're talking about some of the strategies and some of the issues that have to do with business and economics. So I'd like to maybe compare notes, because we've got some money to work on that.
Great, love to. The thing I think that would be useful for DoD is to have an exemplar. They need something that they constantly can look at and compare what they're doing today with what they ought to be doing. And I think that's a great contribution from Doug. And if we could somehow work together to create that, I think it would make a big difference. Because basically, they try things, but when you look at each one of their little trials, you can find the thing that doesn't work. You know, it's broken in some really fundamental way, and so even though it's interesting, it's not going to be successful. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. The first is about benchmarking. It's been apparent from previous sessions from people at SRI that benchmarking is something important that's going on within SRI. Do you have any kind of benchmarks for measuring your own exponential improvement and whatnot? The second,
low blow.
No offense. The second question I had was regarding your comment on collaborative environments, and I was wondering what your opinion on Augment NLS was in terms of how it addresses needs we have for collaborative environments.
Okay, I'm not technically qualified to answer the last one. I will answer the first one, however. Frankly, we have very poor benchmarks. The way I see it's successful, you actually watch it happen. And when a team goes from nothing to doing something that changes the world in 6 months, in retrospect, you can see what went on, and it was certainly not linear. Whether it's exponential or not, it's not linear. And when you see people who don't do this, basically, in my experience, when all those ingredients are in place, the probability of success is about 95%. When one of those ingredients I mentioned is missing, the probability of success goes down to about 5%. So when we put together teams, if I don't see all of those ingredients, we don't do it. So that's one kind of benchmark. That's now what the actual rate is. It depends on all kinds of things. In the web, it's different than doing biotech stuff, which can take many years because it's just a lot harder to build systems and process technologies than it is to come up with a concept.
Do you see the use of multiple intelligence research, the ability to do far left brain, far right brain, and to tap into different forms of intelligence as tying directly into exponential performance improvement?
I do. I think, again, that's one of the beautiful things about putting people in a room. They think differently, and so they develop different representations of the same problem, and that's one of the things you want to tap into. We're mentioning a story. The services do very fundamental stuff. They give people a task, and they have them solve them individually, and then they give them basically the same kind of task and ask them to solve it as a team, and then they compare the scores. It's not even close. So they don't even have to tell them the implication of that when they're done. It's not even close.
Does Howard Gardner's work and some of the people maybe around that have any direct influence or any? I mean, the interesting thing is to take any practical applications of, say, Michael Jordan's physical intelligence or something, or to get more specifically into this area.
Don't know. Jeff, what's the most important thing to you?
In what respect?
Well,
In what respect? I was...
this is like... So when you think about these things at Sun, how do you think about what goes on and what's important in your company?
Well, oh, gee, that's such an open-ended question. In some ways, I think Sun has stumbled into some of these things, in a sort of interesting way without really understanding it. I want to try to go back to the DoD thing a little bit and maybe very abstractly try to tie these things together. Sun, unlike all the other computer companies, Sun hardly makes anything in the hardware that it ships. It's a really interesting phenomenon. So we don't have a fab plant. We design chips, but we don't actually make them. We don't make CRTs. We don't make power supplies. We don't make disks. We actually don't make any of the components of the stuff that we put together. Yet somehow we have managed to do quite well, both in terms of market growth and stock share and stuff like that. So what is going on there? In an interesting way, I think it goes back. I can relate it back, in fact, to the DoD example in a way. We basically take components from all the other companies in the world and piece them together in a way that allows us to add massive system integration value, and do that in such a way that our component suppliers, we can choose and stay ahead of the competition in each individual component. And yet all our competition has availability to all those components, but we have somehow mastered a way of putting that together so that our system, total system integration and what we deliver sort of stays out in front. And it's a interesting kind of model for a company, which I actually believe we're going to start seeing more of. And it has a lot to do with what Alan talked about interoperability on the components and how we manage that and deal with it. It allows us to do a kind of scalability that is really interesting, because we can scale up enormously fast to do things. And I haven't touched on the other aspect of SRI, so I'll stop with that. I'm not talking about the research side of Sun that I'm in, but just Sun as a company, I think, is a different kind of model, which makes it sort of an interesting primitive example, possibly, of the way some of these things will go.
Yeah.
I'd just like to build on what you're saying about trust in teams. Our organisation has got staff in Europe, US, both sides of the US and Japan, and our membership is similarly distributed. It's about the same. And either when we're working in internally, just with the staff, trying to develop products, services, or ways of presenting ourselves to members or customers, or when we're grouping together customers and suppliers to come together to try and build some consensus around a requirement or an idea or a vision or a standard. The overriding important thing in all of that is trust. Now, in a virtual organisation, trust is incredibly difficult to build. So if you're distributed around the world, it's always the other guy's fault, you know. And communication is not the whole thing. It is about things like ensuring that you've got clear understanding of what you expect people to do, about knowing that they understand what they're going to do and that they're competent to deliver it. But it's about other things like, I remember the CEO of W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, saying once upon a time that there's no such thing as a virtual beer. Right? You know, if you're going to bond and build a team that's going to work effectively together, occasionally you've got to do the beer and pizza thing. Right. And then there's the touch of the senior people to actually make sure that the values promulgated throughout the organisation in a consistent way. So trust is a really huge thing, and underneath all of that, if someone, and trust isn't just honesty, integrity. It's about are they able, capable, willing, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, if people don't fit, they're so hugely disruptive. You have to fix that problem.
I've got to break that. They run out of tape in a minute. So we can terminate gracefully and start again in about 10 minutes or so. So thank you very much, Kurt.
Thank you.